Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ahmed. I am the TA for this course for the summer 2022. That's Econ 2102A. And we will be having a regular tutorials every Tuesday and Thursday. So for more details, please refer to the class syllabus. And every week we'll be going through some questions that's related to the topic and also to the lectures and also the problem sets that we're going to go through, which will be very similar to the questions that you will be responsible to submit as an assignment and also for the midterm and final exam. Also, I propose 2 office hours, whichever one you can do. So our tutorial starts at 4:35 p.m. So that's again Tuesday and Thursdays. So I propose that if you're on campus, if you're in a school, I'm usually here, so I have an open door policy. You can knock on my door anytime. My office is located in Loeb. That's building or block B. The office number is 842. It's again B. So that's an open door policy. Anytime you can drop by, and then I have no problem. Also, on Zoom, if you can't do it, then my proposal will be that every Tuesday and Thursday from 3 to 4:20, because then I need 15 minutes to prepare for the tutorial. So I will say an hour and 20 minutes. So it's 80 minutes of an office hours twice a week, which is on Tuesday and Thursday. Again, this will be on the PM, and you can ask any questions or for any clarification of any problems that we do. I will be doing recording, and this recording will be posted on the Brightspace, and you'll be able to see it later on. I would strongly recommend that you will try your best, make an attempt to make it to the tutorial and to the lecture, because live, that's the time where you can ask any questions. Otherwise, you'll be just listening to the video. And then you won't be able to ask any question unless you come to these office hours. So without further ado, I would start with the first tutorial. And my apologies because I recorded this tutorial twice, and for some reason I couldn't find it on the cloud, and I was supposed to be recorded and uploaded on Brightspace on its own, but it didn't happen. Anyway, so that's for the third time I've been recording this one, and my apologies if some of the students are waiting to see this tutorial. Now, the series of questions has been given. The first questions, we're gonna go for the question number 1. So that's a question number 1. So the question reads as a farmer, so it's a farmer, which is in a business of growing a bushels of wheat. So it's a bushel of wheat. I'm just gonna BW. And it sells when he grows these bushels of wheat, and then he sells it for $1 to a miller, a person who has a mill. And the miller turns this wheat, so the turn, okay, wheat, he turns the wheat into flour. And when he turns it into flour, the miller sells the flour. So the miller, he sells the flour to a baker. And he's selling it for $3. $3. So the baker he uses this flour, he uses the flour to make loaf of bread. And the baker, he sells it to an engineer, for example, in the question, that's what it says, engineer for $6, the loaf of bread. Now, the question is asking is to compute the value added, VA, at each stage of production and the GDP. So the question is basically asking that we have a different stages, and that requires an input, and GDP is the definition of the total values of all finished goods. So the finished goods here will be the loaf of bread, but then it has all these other processes where the farmer, he grows and then he sell it to the miller. Miller, he takes and he grinds the wheat and then makes it flour, and then he sells it to the baker, and baker, he goes into a further process of making a dough, and he needs an oven, he needs gas, and he needs the infrastructures to build to make the loaf of bread. And then he sells the loaf of bread is the final or the finished product, which he sells it to consumer. And now he's asking you to calculate or compute the value added at each stage of the production. I think it would be best to know the definition of some of these terminologies, and then it makes it very much easier for you and for everyone else to understand and to do the computation. What is value added in economy? So the contribution of a private industry or a government sectors to overall gross domestic product, which is the GDP, is the value added of an industry, also referred to as a GDP by industry. We can say that this is an industry making a bread. So if all stages of production, we know about the stages of production, farmer, miller, baker. If all stages of production occurs within a country's border, let's say that we are talking about, this is the border of a country and it's Canada. Within the borders of the country, the total value added at all stages, 1, 2, and 3, all these stages added is what counted in the GDP of that country. So the total value added is the market price, which is this, of the final product or service, and only counts production within a specific time period. So economists can, in this way, determine how much value an industry contributes to a nation's GDP. Value added in an industry refers to the differences between the total revenue on industry and the total cost of inputs, $1, $3, and $6 here, for example. So value added in an industry refers to the difference between the total revenue of an industry and the total cost of input, and the sum of labor, materials, and services purchased from other businesses within a reporting period. See the baker, he buys the inputs from miller, from a gas company, from rentals, the property that he's building, the oven, and the oil, the salt, and these other inputs that is required to make the loaf of bread. So the total revenue or output of an industry consists of a sale of the sales and the other operating income, for example, commodity taxes and inventory changes, but inputs that could be purchased from other firms to produce a final product, including raw material that we have mentioned here, semi-finished goods here, and energy and services. So this now will bring us to this question, to answer the question. So as we explain the questions, and then we say that, okay, each person, let's go to the next question. So each person's value added, I mean the farmers, the millers, and the baker, is the equal. So each person's value added, so each person's value added, which is VA, equals to the total value of what this person, of what he or she produce and this is minus the value of intermediate inputs that he or she started with. So now let's start with the first person. The first is a farmer. So the farmer's value added is $1. And here we have to make an assumption, and the assumption is that he has a cost which is equal to 0. Means the farmers be making this assumption that he doesn't have a cost. So this is just an assumption that he doesn't have a cost. So he makes $1. Miller, on the other hand, where he buys the bushels of wheat from the farmer, his value added is that the final product, that the total value of he or she's product, which is the final product that he sells it as a flour to the baker, he sells it for $3. And minus the value of intermediate inputs because the inputs was that he bought these bushels of wheat from the farmer, and he paid the farmer $1. So his value added is $2. Similarly, for the baker, value added is that his final product, where he sells it to the engineer, the loaf of bread, he sells it for $6. But then minus the cost of the inputs that he uses to produce the final good is $3, where he pays the farmer. And therefore, that is equal to $3. So his value added. Now, as we know, the GDP is the value of final good. Final or finished product. Finished goods and services. Goods and services. Let's go to the next one. So by just looking at this answer, adding those three value added, we can see that the GDP is equal to $6. Because, and this is because the price of the final good which is loaf of bread is $6. You can look at it through other perspective, and alternatively, you can look at it, say the GDP. You can calculate the GDP by adding up all the values added at all stages of production. So the value added at all stages of production. What are those? The first one is a farmer. He makes $1, plus the miller, he makes $3. Actually, his value added, he sells it for $3, but $1 is his cost, so that will be $2. So his value added is $2, plus the baker, he pays the miller $3, and then he sells the bread for $6. Therefore, his or her value added, and that is equal to $6. So when you add up these, then it gives you $6. So the GDP is, again, we say is the sum of the value added at all stages of production, and that is equal to $6. So that answers these questions. It's just probably a little bit of thinking, and I don't think it's a very hard question. Is the value added is what you're selling the product for minus what you're paying for or all your costs. So that's how you add it. And then when you add the GDP, GDP is your total value of all added values. Or you can say that the price or the price of your finished product. So that's question number one. For question number two, you're giving a chart or an information. So that's question number two. You're giving a question and asking you to consider the following table. So consider the following table. So for the first one is you're giving the price and the quantity of information. So the price of an automobile. And then the quantity of an automobile. Then you also have the price, loaf of bread, and also you have the quantity loaf of bread. So that's the first piece of information that you're given. Now you have two different periods, which is a year. We have 2019 and then we have 2020. So in 2019, the cost or the price of automobile was $50,000. And the quantity of automobile produced in 2019, it was $100. 100 pieces or 100 quantities equal 100. The price of loaf of bread, it was $10 in 2019. And the number of breads produced is it's 500,000. So that's 500,000 pieces have been, so that's 5. Okay, so 500,000 pieces. So this is for 2019. Now for 2020, the production and cost has changed, and therefore the cost, the price of the automobile have increased from $50,000 to $60,000, and the quantity produced has increased from 100 to 120. The cost or the price of loaf of bread has also increased to $20 a piece, but the quantity has reduced from 500,000 to 400,000 piece or number of production. Now, the question is asking, suppose that economy produces and consumes only bread and automobile. So this is a small economy, and this economy has only two pieces of production or two goods to produce. It's the automobile and bread. And then they're asking you that 2019, year 2019, is use this one as your base year. And compute the following statistics for each of them. It's asking you to compute nominal GDP, real GDP, GDP deflator, and it's asking you to calculate real GDP growth rate in year 2020. So these are statistics that you're asked to compute and using these information that is given to you. So as I said, it will be always best and it will be more helpful for you to first and foremost know the definition of these statistics. Once you know the definition of the statistics, then it will feel more comfortable answering these questions. I know that you have been studying this in Econ 1002, but just to refresh your mind, to refresh your memory, I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. I'm just going to go through some of these definitions for your information. And the first one is the nominal GDP, or nominal gross domestic product. So nominal gross domestic or nominal GDP is evaluated at current price. So nominal GDP is evaluated at current prices. And you will see when we're doing the questions, then you could see what I mean. So we know that the GDP is the monetary value of all goods and services produced in a country. And this is where the nominal differs from the real GDP, in that it includes changes in a price due to inflation. In real GDP, it takes into account the changes in price due to inflation, which reflects the rate of prices increase in an economy. In other words, nominal GDP is an assessment of an economic production in an economy, but includes the current prices of goods and services in its calculation. Also, GDP is typically measures as the monetary value of goods and services produced, since nominal GDP doesn't remove the pace of rising prices when comparing one period to another, so it can inflate the growth figure. And just again, to understand the nominal GDP, again, nominal GDP is an assessment of economic production in an economy that includes current prices in its calculation. In other words, it does not strip out inflation or the pace of rising prices, which can inflate the growth figure. And all goods and services counted in nominal GDP are valued at the prices that are actually sold for it in that year. Now, the effect it's good to know the effect of inflation on GDP, and especially nominal GDP. Because it is measured in current prices, growing nominal GDP from year to year might reflect a rise in prices as opposed to growth in an amount of goods and services produced. If all prices rise more or less, together, known as inflation, then this will make nominal GDP appear greater. Inflation is negative force for economic participation or participants because it diminishes the purchasing power of income and savings, both for consumers and for investors. So this brings us to the definition of a second terms of statistics that we need to compute, and that is real GDP. And here you can see the difference between real, and as we went through it briefly, but here I'm going to go, when you know the real definition of real GDP, then you can see the differences between the two. So real GDP is an inflation adjusted measures that reflects the value of all goods and services produced by an economy in a given year. And that is expressed in base year. If you remember in the question, it says use 2019 as a base year. This is where you need your base year, because then you're comparing the years after to your base year to see if their prices went up or prices went down, and that's how you will determine the rate of inflation or deflation. And it's often referred to as a constant price GDP. So real GDP is also referred to as a constant price GDP or inflation corrected GDP or constant dollar GDP. So these different literature, they're using different words. All of them means the same thing. But in other words, so real GDP is an inflation adjusted measures, as we said it before, and that reflects the value of all goods and services produced within an economy in a given year, period. It could be 3 years, could be 3 months, 6 months, a year, but here it's always a year, expressed in base year prices, which for our question will be 2019, and is often referred to as a constant price, inflation corrected, or constant dollar GDP. Real GDP makes comparing GDP from year to year and from different years more meaningful. Why? Because it shows comparison for both the quantity and value of goods and services. So real GDP is calculated by dividing. So real GDP is calculated by dividing the nominal GDP over GDP deflator. This is the formula that you use to calculate the real GDP. So let us recap to understand real GDP. So real GDP is a macroeconomic statistics, which measures the value of all goods and services produced by an economy in a specific period, you can say the year, adjusted for inflation. Essentially, it measures a country's total economic output. Again, they are adjusted for price changes. This is something that probably you need to know or you don't need to know. Governments around the world uses both nominal and real GDP as metrics for analyzing the economic growth and purchasing power over time. But this is done using the GDP price deflator, which is called the implicit price deflator, which measures the changes in a price for all of the goods and services produced in an economy. Now, here, let's do one comparison of nominal GDP to drive the point home versus real GDP. We say that GDP is one of the most important metrics for evaluating the economic activities, the stability and the growth of goods and services in an economy, it is usually reviewed from two angles, as we mentioned, nominal and real GDP. Nominal GDP is a macroeconomic assessment of a value of goods and services using current prices and its measure. It is also referred to as the current dollar GDP. Means for 2019, when you're calculating GDP, so you're not changing the prices. Quantity times prices in 2019 for all the goods, when you add it up, that gives you a GDP. While for real GDP, if 2019 is your base year, then for 2020, you take the quantity sold in 2020 times the price of base year, and that will give you the differences. And then you can say how much of inflation or deflation do you have. So real GDP takes into the consideration, again, adjustment for changes in inflation. This means that if inflation is positive, real GDP would be lower than the nominal and vice versa. Without a real GDP adjustment, positive inflation greatly inflates and GDP in nominal terms. The third terms that we were asked, or the matrix to calculate, was the GDP deflator. GDP deflator, or an implicit price deflator, is an indicator of the impact of inflation on GDP in an economy, or it's merely notes the price changes in an economy in 1 year. So GDP deflator gets its name from the process of calculating the value of price changes as reflecting in a real nominal GDP of the country. So GDP deflator is an essential measure in an economy that helps compare the rise in price levels of goods and services between years. And this is not the same as CPI, which is the consumer price index. GDP deflator can be compared between several periods of times without the use of base year, because it's constant. And also, you cannot use it as a specific baskets of goods. So GDP deflator is flexible. But like the CPI, consumer price index, GDP deflator does not have a base value, and that equals to 100. So GDP deflator value is calculated using the following formula. So this is a very handy formula for calculating GDP deflator, and that is equal to nominal GDP divided by real GDP times 100, and that's going to give you the GDP deflator. So nominal GDP refers to a current price in a market. We have said this more than once, and I hope that you must be now, by this time, you're familiar with this word. Whereas real GDP measures the actual cost that went into the producing the product. So nominal GDP is calculated using that year's prices, while the real GDP is calculated using the base year prices, which in our question will be the 2019, as the question is asking you to use 2019 as a base year. So GDP deflator flexibility allows the study of various economic phenomena. What are those? Expenditure pattern, study and behavior changes in a demand and consumption of the people. And this is possible because the deflator is not based on a particular set or basket of goods. So it changes with a spending pattern. So GDP deflator is price index, which is PI, that focuses on showing the impact of inflation or deflation on the current prices in the economy, thereby showing how dependent and relative GDP is to a price change. So let's do the question. So these were some of the terminology, and the reason I'm giving you and repeating this one so that to get you up to speed so that you don't have to worry about it. So nominal GDP is the current prices. You put 2019 here because we want to calculate 2019. So what you do, you take the price of the product times the quantity produced, what quantity produced at what price. In 2019 automobile, the price was $50,000, and the quantity produced was 100. That was for one good. Same thing plus for the second good, the third good, the fifth good, the 10, and n goods. So you can do for as many as goods. And then it was a loaf of bread. What was the price times quantity? So the price of loaf of bread was $10, and the quantity that was produced was 500,000. Okay, 5. And what is our nominal GDP? Is 1, 2. So that's a 10 million. We're calculating the nominal GDP for 2020. We have two periods, period 2019 and 2020, and we have two goods for that economy. The price of the automobile from 2019 have increased to 60,000, and the production has increased from 100 to 120 piece of that automobile, plus the price of the loaf of bread in 2020 increased from $10 to $20, times the quantity, and the quantity has reduced to 400,000 instead of 500,000. And by adding these, calculating, it should be 15,200,000. As you can see here, these prices are current prices. We did not multiply when calculating nominal GDP to a basic prices. We calculated to a current prices. The current prices of the vehicle was 60,000 in 2020. The current prices of the vehicle or automobile was 50,000 in 2019, and same thing for the bread. And that's how you calculate it. It's not adjusted for inflation. Now, let's calculate the GDP, real GDP. Real GDP 2019. What was the number, the price in 2019? So it was, the price was 50,000. It was times 100, plus the price was $10 and 500,000. Again, it will be 10 million. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, real GDP would be the base year price is for the vehicle, the automobile was $50,000 times the quantity has increased to 120. So base year price, that is base year price times current production, current level of production in that particular year, plus $10 was the loaf of bread times the quantity produced in 2020, which was 400,000. 1,000 pieces. And therefore, that's again 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's a 10 million. So this is very important. That's the base year. And now, just to save some time, I'm going to go through GDP deflator. Again, for 2019, that will be equal to 10 million over 10 million times 100, that's 100. And let's go to the next page. GDP deflator. And that is equal to 115,200,000 divided by 10 million. That is times 100, and that gives you 152. Now, real GDP growth in year 2020, then we have $10 million. That's equal to 0%. So the economic or the growth in GDP in that year is 0, and it should not be surprised. It could happen. And also there could be a deficit where there should be not only there is no growth, but also there is a shortfall as well. So this GDP could shrink. And that was the question, and it was question number 2. So let's do question number 3. I'm going to go to the next page. So question number 2, again, they gives you a table with a number of years. So that's a question number 3. The table is, first they give you years, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. So these are the number of years. And then it gives you price of a product. The product is the price of burger. And again, this is a small economy. In this economy, we have only 2 products. One is a burger, and the other one is the price of books. Price of book. So the price of burger in 2015 was $10. In 2016, it increased to $11. 2017, it went even higher, and it's $13. In 2018, it dropped to 12. And in 2019, it went to $15. The price of books is 40 in 2015. In 2016 is $42. In 2017, that's $45. And it's $49 in 2018. And it's $55 in 2019. Now the question says, so these are the prices that we have. But in order to calculate what the question is asking, again, you need a price and a quantity. So the quantity is giving that this economy with these pricings have a capacity of producing a quantity of burger in this economy is equal to 30. So this economy can produce only 30. And the quantity of books they can produce, this economy, is the number of 6. So it can produce 6. Now, the question is asking to calculate the CPI, Consumer Price Index, for each year, and then it's giving you a base year prices, which is 2016 as a base year. And also is asking you what is the inflation in 2018. You will see in 2018, and then that's your base year. So that's why he's asking. Now, I hope that this information you have copied, and then I will be mailing you the solution, then a written solution, and also uploading this video. So I'm just going to go to the next page. Consumer Price Index in 2015 is equal to price of good, which is a burger, $10. The quantity produced was 30, plus the price of books was $40, and times the quantity produced was 6, and that's divided by the base year, where the price of the burger was $11 in 2016, and the number produced quantity is 30 plus 42 times 6. So when you calculate this one, since it's your base year, so you need to calculate this one once, and then times it 100, and then you can use it for the rest of the year to make the comparison. And then when you do the calculation, then your number comes out. When you multiply this one, you add them up, then you will get 540. And then when you multiply this and add them up, then you get 582. So 582 is your price, and times 100, and that is equal to 93. So this number you need for all of these other calculation of CPI. So then CPI 2016 is equal 11 times 30 plus 42 times 6, and divided by 582. That's the base year. Times 100, so that's 100. Now we're comparing every other year to this. So CPI 2017 is equal to the price of burger is $13 times 30 produced, plus the price of books is 45, quantity produced is 6, and divided by the year of your base year is 582. Either you write this whole thing or you just write this number, it doesn't matter, as long as you know what you're doing. Then when you multiply it by 100 and you do multiplication and multiplying this, add them up, then the number you will get will be equal to 113. So if you can see a difference of 100 and 120, by default, you can say that there's a 13% increase in inflation. CPI 2018, and that is equal to, we have the price of burgers is $12 times 30 projection, and also we have the price of book, which is 49 times 6, and then it divided by 582 times 100, and that is equal to 112. Similarly, we can have the CPI for 2019, and that is equal to the price of burger is 15 times 30, the number of quantity produced, plus the cost of book is 55 times 6 produced, and then 585 is comparing to the base year, times 100, and that's equal to 134. Now, to calculate the inflation, rate in 2018, that is equal to the CPI in 2018, which is $112, 12 minus 113 and divided by 113. So that's 2017. That is 2017. And that is 2018. So you're comparing it to 2018. And again, this is times 100. So the inflation rate is minus 0.9%. We say that if this number was positive, we have inflation, which is positive number. If this number was positive, positive number including 0. Deflation which is negative. Now, when you see this number is minus in front of you, you say that there was a deflation. Means we didn't have inflation. Actually, the prices had decreased, not increased, but it was decreased by 0.9%. So that was the questions by calculating, but you make sure you know the difference between this minus sign is gonna make a big difference between inflation and deflation. Inflation means the price of something goes up, and the deflation is the price of something that goes down comparing to the base year. Question number 4, and I think that's the last question for today's tutorial. And the question is asking what are the differences? Between CPI and GDP deflator. To answer these questions, we probably have, and I'm sure that I went, when I was explaining the GDP deflator and talking about the GDP and CPI, I kind of briefly mentioned it, but here just I'm gonna go and then explain it again. The basket of goods and services is fixed for CPI. So the basket of goods and services is fixed for CPI. Where these baskets of goods and services changes, where the basket of goods and services changes over time for GDP deflator. That's one difference. That's one. The second difference is that in CPI, only consumer goods are considered. Whatever consumer consumes, that is the good that is being considered when you're calculating the CPI. On the other hand, in GDP deflators, all types of goods in GDP deflator all kinds of goods are considered. And that includes producer, consumer, and etc. And again, these are only considered as long as they produce domestically. So these are for the GDP deflator. So that was the second one. The third difference is that the CPI can include importing consumer goods. So the CPI It can include importing consumer goods, this is imported consumer goods, goods that produced somewhere else and then it was imported to Canada, for examples. So CPI is including all imported goods the consumer consumes in that economy, but GDP deflator does not include imported goods. So if it doesn't include, then what is include? It only considers those goods that are produced within the country. So they do not include any product that is imported from other countries, the GDP deflator. And then it would only consider those goods that are produced in within the economy or within the border of that country. And that was the three brief differences between CPI and GDP deflator. So I hope to see you on Monday. Try to be and make it if possible. And I'll let you go with this, and then shortly you will see these recordings on Brightspace, and also I'll be sending you a written solution for this tutorial as well. Take care of each other. See you on Monday. See you on Tuesday. Thank you.